Hey everyone, it's Andrew Schiffman.
Harry Turcott here. We both worked at MTV in the music and talent department in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, it was a time where music videos, TRL, The Jersey Shore, and the Osbournes ruled the airwaves.
Yes, Andrew, those are some great years. So tune in every week as we catch up with old MTV coworkers, record label execs, VJs, and artists.
I can't wait, Perry. We'll give you insights into meeting superstars before they were superstars and some juicy secrets from that golden age of MTV.
So grab your headphones and get ready to relive the era of music television and the people who shaped a generation.
All right, we're back. Welcome to the Music Lounge, Perry. How's your week been?
Doing really well, Andrew. How are you? I should actually mention that I'm coming to you today from lovely Crossville, Tennessee, which is smack dab between Knoxville and Nashville. So those are great cities, but where I am is a little bit rural. So not much going on here.
Very good, very good. Tell us who we're talking to today.
So today we have John Franck, who is a former music exec at ADA Warner, 300, Koch, and Razor and Tie, and is now the founder of Undrcvr Entertainment, which is a boutique music marketing company. Welcome, John.
Good to see you both.
Hello, John. How's it going?
Yeah.
So, with the introduction that we just had, obviously you've been at multiple music companies during your career, including Sony. Big part of where you were working was at 300 with the founder Leor Cohen, who is now at Google and YouTube. So just kind of talk about the growth of your career and what it was like working with Leor.
So I'm gonna take it all the way back to kind of the infancy of my career. I always had some kind of thought in my head that I would love to work in music, but I had no idea what that even meant, right? So I grew up being a music fanatic, as most people are initially in the music business. And my very first internship while I was at college was at Atlantic Records. And at Atlantic Records, I worked in a department that no longer exists. It was called a pre-production department, where literally you would lay out artwork, send it to the plant, and the plant would manufacture it. So I spent a summer working in that department, and I had no idea what I was doing. I remember it clearly because I sent the parts of the first Stone Temple Pilots record to the wrong plant. And this was probably my second or third week being an intern, and I thought the world was going to end. I was going to get immediately fired. And in parallel with that, I was a music writer throughout college, and I wrote for my college newspaper. And having grown up in Europe, I wrote for several European magazines. So I was kind of living the life of Almost Famous when I would be in college and I would disappear on the weekends and go on tour with Motorhead or whatever. And I did that all throughout college. And
where did you go to college, John?
I went to Fordham in the city. So in me living this kind of Almost Famous life, I met a number of people in the music business, whether it was publicists or marketing people or whatnot. And my very first job in the record business was working for Jeff Jones at Elektra, who now runs the affairs for Apple for the Beatles. And
very cool.
And I couldn't believe my good fortune, because on day one I walked into Elektra and the roster was like Metallica, Moby, Motley Crue, Fruity Johnston, The Cure. I couldn't even wrap my head around how incredible it was. Unfortunately for us, the company got merged with East West and we all got blown out. And this happened in like the first 4 months I was there. Sylvia Rohn took over, and then our entire 2 floors of Elektra people were wiped out. And that was the end of that. So
wow.
I'm like, the record business is really fun. So after that, I started temping, and I ended up temping at Sony Music. And I got my first, real job at Sony Music. working for a product manager who left the business, and then working for a gentleman named Randy Irwin. And at the time, Randy was working for 550 Music, who had, Celine Dion, who was the biggest artist on the planet at the time, and then a bunch of like developing things. And Randy was the product manager for Celine, and him and I dealt with Renee and her people quite a bit on those two Diamond records, and that was an incredible experience. And that segued into being a radio promotion assistant, working for Joel Clayman, also at 550 Music, where that was alternative, and there was Fuel and Case Choice and all these kinds of things. And this is where my career kind of begins, and it's kind of a long-winded way to get there. When back in the day, when you worked in radio promotion, the goal was to become a field rep, right? Like, do a great job being the assistant, and we'll send you to Cleveland or to Kansas or whatever. And I said to Joel, I don't want to be a radio promotions person. I would be terrible at it. And I said, I'm really the wrong guy to do this. And so he said, I totally understand. I'm going to bring in a replacement, which ended up being John Boris, who I'm sure you guys, he replaced me, and he had better hair and was charismatic. And he was like, that was the perfect guy. Like, take him, right? So I found out about an entry-level marketing opportunity at a company called Koch Records that I'd never heard of. I interviewed, I got the gig. Within 2 weeks of getting the gig, guy hired me, got fired. So here again, like, starting at a new company, I don't know anybody. And at the time, Koch was trying to find its way as a record label, not a distribution company. And we were trying to sign Megadeth, the Black Crowes, and Stabbing Westward. We ended up signing Stabbing Westward. I became the product manager for Stabbing Westward. And then one day, Alan Grumblatt, who was running the company day to day, said, so I've got a little hip hop imprint called In the Paint, and I am signing RZA, and you're going to be the marketing guy for RZA. And I said to Alan, I don't know the first fucking thing about marketing anything hip hop. I'm going to need your help. And he said, I'll teach you. I said, whatever that may be, that's cool. So he hand wrote a number on a piece of paper, and it was Method Man's number. And he said, I need you to find Method Man. So for 3 days, I tried to find Method Man, which I never found Method Man. So we ended up putting out a Bobby Digital record, and that was my first kind of entry into hip hop. And then he said, and you're also going to be the video commissioner, because we don't have any video commissioning people, so you need to go figure that out. I said, great. So at the time, like any label at the time, we were spending ridiculous amounts of money making videos. I made a $300,000 video with RZA, that ran 9 hours overtime. I had to light Essex Street like it was the daytime, the middle of the night. Like, I'd never done this in my life ever, right? But now I'm the video guy too, on top of being like the marketing guy. So I did that, and eventually that role became more and more of a hip hop minded role. And then at one point, and now Dee Sonoram had joined the company, and Shadow Stokes had joined the company, and Marlene Dominguez was working with Alan, and we were kind of like, that was the core team. And then one day Alan came to me and said, we cannot spend this kind of money making videos anymore because we're going to go out of business. He goes, your budget now is going to be 10 times less. And I'm like, what the fuck? How is that going to work, right? So he said to me, you're going to start making $20,000, $30,000 videos. And at the time, this was probably in like 2003, I want to say. And at the time, I'm like, I don't even know who's going to take the call. So I remember calling the head of video production for Epic named Scott Spanjak. And I said, Scott, can you send me your Rolodex of all the production companies in LA? I'm just going to start calling them. And I literally would spend days calling reps being like, do you have any directors in this price range? And they would laugh at me. They were like, well, it's impossible to make those videos. And I'm like, okay. So I started putting together like my own video teams of people. I'd be like, hey, here's an up and coming, second AD. Here's a talented DP. this line producer seems like they know what the fuck they're doing. Let's put them together and make these like wannabe video production marriage, like arranged marriages. And that's how we made videos. And then all of a sudden I was making, 20, 30, 40 videos a year as the video commissioner, in addition to being like the head of marketing.
Right.
And it became one kind of gig. And then at one point, Dee's like, well, we have to pitch these videos to MTV and BET and all these things. So that became another layer on top of that as well, where we were all going to MTV and BET and VH1 pitching these videos. And at that time, I think is how I probably met Andrew and Tuma and Yomi and all these people who became
right. Justin was there.
Justin was there. We all became lifelong friends. And it would literally be from like, hey, he's the commissioner guy, he's the marketing guy, he's the video promo guy, and we're going to go buy everybody lunch. Right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what it was.
So when you got into this industry in the beginning, were you trying to figure out where you felt best suited, or was it always kind of a marketing role? Or having a job where it was video commissioner, marketing and whatever, you were just like, this is just some super position that I'm happy with because it involves everything? Or was there one thing that you were kind of aiming for?
I face planted headfirst into doing all these things.
Right.
I had no aspirations or thoughts about doing it. And at the time, major labels were not set up that way. Major labels, if you were the product manager, you were the product manager. If you were the PR person, you did PR.
Very siloed, yeah.
Exactly, very siloed, centralized, the whole thing. And the wonderful thing about being at a scrappy indie label, you had to learn how the engine worked, which then segued into like getting to sit in BA meetings, learning how deals work. And so you kind of got like a panoramic look under the hood of how these things worked. And I never thought about like, what is it that I can't do? The only thing I didn't want to do again was I don't want to call radio.
Right.
I didn't want to pitch press and all these other things. I'm like, well, fuck it. I can figure it out. And I was a Koch for 10 years. And I thought the company, again, was going to go under. It was going through, kind of shaky times. And I got an opportunity to go to Razor and Tie, which was a full-on rock gig without any hip hop whatsoever. I got there, and within a month, the head of A&R quit, and there was no head of A&R. And Kurt Stefik said to me, who was the head of radio promotion, well, Pete Berger just got laid off from Epic. Why don't we hire him? And it turns out that Pete's wife had been my intern. So I called Pete and I said, do you want to do A&R? And he goes, not a chance in hell. And I said, at the time he was working for Jordan Feldstein, who passed away. And he was managing Vanessa Carlton, who just so happened to be on Razor and Tie. Jordan was managing Maroon 5 and Sarah Bareilles. And after kind of a bit of a dance and a protracted negotiation, Pete came in as, our head of A&R. And then him and I became like frickin' frack. Like we between the two of us, we signed
Frickin' Frank.
We signed 18 acts together, including The Pretty Reckless, The Sword, and a bunch of other stuff. And then there's a common theme here. Razor and Tie was getting ready to sell. And Pete's like, I got an offer to go to 300. I'm going to take the offer, but you should stay behind and you'll probably just end up running Razor and Tie. Instead, I got blown out. So I got blown out in the, thinning of the herd for the sale. And one day Pete says, Todd Moskowitz is going to call you. He's part of this new company that I'm going to join. And Todd says to me, do you still know how to do hip hop shit? And I go, you never forget. And he's like, can you and Pete come over together? And that's going to be the marketing and A&R people for 300. So then I get to 300 in January 2014, and we're in a war room with no phones, no computers, and nothing. It's literally like a barren space, and it's Kevin Lyles' temporary office. And at the time, Kevin was only focused on management. He was not really part of 300, the label. And then a few days later, Lior came in. He sat down directly next to me in an open cubicle, and the whole thing kind of started, and I wasn't in, and I have to say, I wasn't remotely prepared in my head for what any of this was going to be. I'd never joined a startup before. I had joined two previous companies that needed to be reimagined, which we help with, but a full-on startup is not something I ever even thought about. So the company at the time would literally be Lior sitting next to me, Raina sat in front of me, Salim was down the hall, Billy Burrs sat behind me, Pete sat next to Billy Burrs, and that was the company. So we would literally have marketing meetings with 7 people, when the company started. And, there were some days, and this is kind of funny, at the time, Lior was managing Travis Scott and was managing Rick Ross. And he would be sitting next to me having these conversations at full voice, and he was bleeding through the phone, and people would be like, "Who's yelling?" And I'm like, Lior sits next to me.
On the phone with
those
Rick
people.
Ross or someone, yeah.
Yeah. And so it was kind of funny because, I had very good friends at Atlantic, and thank God they were around to help us. And anytime I couldn't figure something out, because we had no staff, we had no production person, no A&R admin, with nobody. So again, the lessons that I had learned at Koch Records became invaluable, because now I'm clearing songs, I'm commissioning videos, I'm doing all these things, but there was no team to do anything.
Right.
But I remember one day somebody called me from Atlantic, and they said to me, they were whispering, they're like, "Do you see Lior? Like, does he come into the office?" I go, "He sits next to me." Literally, like, you don't understand. He's like literally like right there. So
crazy, man.
Really, really crazy. So eventually we found office space. We had signed a bunch of things, Mike Stud and Astor was the first artist that we had signed, which was Tom Silverman's daughter. And then Orlando Wharton, who was our intern, one day came in and said, "There's a kid in Patterson with one eye. He's got a huge record in the clubs. His name is Fetty Wap. And he's got this song called Trap Queen." And he'd already made a video. And we were now in like our makeshift kitchen in the new office. And I said to Orlando, "What did this cost?" And he goes, "I think it costs like $4,000. And I said, "Well, it's out of focus. It's not going to pass standards." Right. And Orlando was like, no, it's going to be a huge hit. Blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And then I remember that year I sat down around Christmas. This is when it takes a turn. I sat down at Christmas with our CFO, Neil Zamel, who I love, and Lior and I, we sat in a room, we ran projections through our roster of I think we had 8 artists, right? And it got to the letter F. We had signed Coheed and Cambria then. We had just signed Highly Suspect. We got to Fetty at the letter F, and Neil's like, "What did we put in for the projection for Fetty Wap?" And I said, "I don't know, 250,000 tracks." And then Lior goes, "You think we'll sell that much?" And I was like, "I don't have a fucking idea. I don't know, right?" And then it sold 10 million. So that's sort of the kind of, I guess, the magic of the business, that you stumble into these things, and people were calling us geniuses and stuff, and we would literally, Mike Olson was our freelance top 40 guy, and he would Eric Olson, I'm sorry, and he would call and say, "I think I can get this on Z100," and I think we laughed. We're like, "How are you going to get a song about cooking crack in the kitchen on Z100, 5 and Meghan Trainor?" Right?
Did it end up getting added?
And then it did, and it became the biggest song in the country. And then Fetty went on tour, and we put Post Malone on as the opener, right? Wow. He was the opener on our tour, and that kind of became its kind of own thing. And then and then Todd signed Young Thug, and Todd signed Migos. Pete had signed Highly Suspect. At the time, Jeff Ungalusi had signed Maggie Lindemann, and then all of a sudden we had like a little bit of a roster, and things were moving.
That's crazy.
Pretty crazy, but that's the magic of the business. You just never have any. At the end of the day, no one really knows, and people. Actually, I think Todd Moskowitz really knows. Todd, if you're listening, you really know. He can actually call it, and he's right.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I like to remind people that, 8 labels passed on the Beatles. So does everyone really know? I don't
Right.
know, you know?
I
Um,
think you have to be passionate and have a vision and believe. And if you believe, maybe other people will believe too,
yeah, and also
in a
the,
way.
the opportunity for success is so minuscule in
Right.
this business. The failure rate, pardon me, is so stratospherically high that, a lot of these things happen by luck, you
Yeah.
know, and
Definitely a crowded space right now.
yeah, and you hope
A
you're at
lot
the
of
right place at
music.
the right time. But
Yeah.
to finish my career arc, 300 ended for me in 2018. We started with a company of none, and I think when I left the company, I think we had 70 people, right? So the
Wow.
company had really grown, and we were having success and all that kind of stuff. And then I got an opportunity to go to ADA and be the head of digital commerce and eventually label services, working for Elias Seaton, who is a brilliant person and brilliant mind that that you know perfectly paired up with the pandemic, and we all know how that how that ended. And then he left to go around SoundCloud. There was a corporate change, and I was out. And so since that time, you know, I kind of ran into like a fork in the road where I'm like, this is my opportunity to do my own thing with
Hmm.
people that I like working with, and with artists that I love, and managers that I can work with, or I can go back into another kind of more structured environment, whether it's an indie label, a management company, whatever. And so that's what we've been doing ever since, And again, going taking it all the way back to the Koch years, the skill sets that you learn along the way that I keep coming back to, these things become really really valuable over time. So you just don't do one thing; you do many different things. And our company has a management company, we have a media buying company, and we have a marketing agency. So a lot of the times these three things coalesce and pair together, and you have to wear different hats to understand how to how to problem solve and talk to artists along the way to get to make sure these things actually work.
We've talked about a lot of artists that you've worked with, both in the hip hop space and the rock space. You're a big Kiss fan.
Mhm.
If you were to have your own label, what kind of roster would you build, and you know, who would be your like top five signings?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of mitigating factors, right?
Dead or alive?
Well, yeah, I mean, I could sign this in 1972. Yeah, I would, retire. But the mitigating factors are funding, like how would the company be funded?
Hmm.
How long would that funding last across different things, right? Talent acquisition, marketing, backroom related kind of administrative things. That's the first thing, right? Based on that and understanding what that is, if it was John Franck Records and I had a limitless amount of money, I don't care what genre of music it's coming from as long as it's great,
Right.
right? As long as we can see a path that is going to work. This is all about A&R, right? If you don't have great A&R, we can market things into a centrifuge. If they're not great, they'll never work, right? So finding the right A&R people to find these things and have a trajectory and a roadmap of their own before they bring it to anybody else in the company. And I've talked a lot about this, at different companies that I've been at. What makes great A&R people is they can find the talent, they can make something great.
Yeah.
They need to convince everybody in the room that there's no is not a possibility. They can move the building, right? But the most important part, parallel of that, is that they have a roadmap to success as to how it's going to work, right? One of the things that I loved about working with Peter Berga is that he had, on any project he ever brought in, he clearly in his mind knew where it would start, where it would go, what the inflection point would be, and how to get it from point A to point whatever,
Hmm.
make it the best it could be. And that is an incredible skill set. If you have an A&R person that possesses all those qualities,
Right.
you're sitting at the front of the car with a marketing person, you have the potential to do great things. knowing again that the failure rate is stratospheric and all these different things. So it's a very long-winded way of saying I would sign whatever I think makes sense that is great based upon the A&R selections that we very carefully make, right?
I think the question should have been, who in the industry would you hire to be your super team?
Yeah, I hard for me to answer that question, but like if you think about the 300 roster, right, and the first 3 years of the company, we had with hits with Fetty, we had Trap Rappers, we had a huge hit with Cheat Codes and Demi Lovato, which like sold millions of units around the world.
Right.
With Highly Suspect, who was one of the best new rock bands I'd seen in maybe like a decade, right? And all of them lived comfortably side by side. There didn't need to be differentiations between, do I want to be a rock label? Do I want to be a hip hop label? All the common thread between all of them is they had amazing, amazing songs, and at least half of those were stars. They walk in the room and the temperature changes.
Yeah.
And those things are really, really, really hard to come by. Incredibly hard to come by.
Yeah. I think in my dream label would probably be the Beatles, Pink Floyd, Oasis, and the Wu-Tang.
Okay. What about you, Perry?
You know, mine would probably be a little bit more pop oriented. I'd say Madonna.
Okay.
That'd be a good signing.
It'd be, and a lot of these are going to be actually Seymour Stein artists, the Smiths, the Cure, which are not necessarily pop oriented, but it shows you what my music tastes are. And I would probably, for someone a little bit more current, you know what? Katy Perry at the beginning of her career was pretty awesome.
You wouldn't want to sign Gaga?
Yeah, I mean, obviously. So, yeah. I mean, we've talked about that story ad nauseum, so I don't need to mention it here.
No,
but
right.
It's funny, when I was at Razor and Tie, we were one of the first labels to try to sign 21 Pilots. And Pete had gone to see them. One of our A&R guys named David Conway, who's a dear friend and now works at Hard Eight Management. He was until recently Tate McRae's manager. And he brought us 21 Pilots. And Pete went to see them in a snowstorm in Columbus. And
wow.
Called me from outside the venue and said, "This is the greatest. I can't tell you how amazing this is. We got to meet the band. We got to sign them, whatever." And about a month later, we flew to LA and we sat with them for like 3 hours at a restaurant, had dinner with them. And their manager was Chris Waltman, radio guy. And they had their whole roadmap laid out, and they had all those songs. Like, they had House of Gold and all the, and I'm like, this is like, how is this even possible? You know what I mean? And I would say, to go back and answer your question, finding a band like that who had in the modern day, right, who had all the tools, every tool you can imagine in their toolbox and in their minds, or how to get from point A to point F or whatever it is, right, is something that I'll never forget. We ultimately didn't sign the band, but I would put them on my modern day roster. How's that?
Right. They just played a big show here at Bridgestone this week, Bridgestone Arena here in Nashville. So
they're incredible band.
We're gonna take a cut in the programming and hit you with a quick fire.
Okay.
30 seconds.
Love it.
Do your best. Liam or Noel Gallagher?
Oh, Liam.
Beavis and Butthead or Celebrity Deathmatch?
Beavis and Butthead.
Glam rock or 80s alternative?
Oh, man. Tie.
Okay. Kiss or Springsteen, the boss?
Oh, my God. killing me. Hi.
Ty, Arctic Monkeys or the Strokes?
Neither.
Some ties and neithers. Very good.
So I guess they would not be signed to your imaginary label. Those last two.
No, actually, the Arctic Monkeys over the Strokes every day.
Music marketing it requires constant adaptation, innovation, using new platforms, all of that stuff. And it's all driven by new technology and fan behavior. Can you talk about some of the key tactics that you found effective today and how they compare to maybe some strategies that you used 20 years ago?
Yeah, from a marketing point of view, the world has been flipped upside down multiple times, beginning in the file sharing years, right? Which are now almost 2 decades behind us, right?
Right.
To answer your question, Perry, it is completely predicated on the type of artist, number one, because each artist needs different things, right? A rock artist will need different things than a rapper, which needs different things than a pop artist, right? First and foremost, the kind of the captain obvious part is the music. If the music is really great and compelling, I really believe at some point it finds its way to an audience. That might take a year, 2 years, 10 years, but it will find a way, right? I think as a marketing agency, we are very intentional and prescriptive in kind of piecing together a what's the word I'm looking for? A marketing roadmap that is specific to each artist, right? We also do it in our management life as well. Like we have rock bands, we have crossover artists, all that kind of stuff, and each one of them needs different things.
Yeah, there's no one size fits all, right?
Yeah. I will say the key thing for anybody that plays live or has the ability to play live, playing shows is non-negotiable to success, right? And I feel like that's something that's been passed over and skipped over in the TikTok and Musical.ly years and the internet years and the influencer years, where like there's no shortcut to success in that world, right? Unless you are, making the kind of music that will absolutely not work in a live setting, you need to figure out a way to play shows locally, become friends with promoters, play shows and play them ad nauseum, right?
Yeah.
Are fans still with the availability of music, at the touch of a finger, are people still going to shows, especially in smaller cities, smaller venues?
They are.
I mean, are bands finding success there?
They absolutely are, but it takes time and it's a grind. You know what I mean? And that is like, listen, there's the obvious things, right? They're like, there's sync, there's PR, there might be radio, maybe, which is really a destination and not a starting point really for anything anymore.
Right.
There is being interesting on social media, knowing how to be authentic. Like those are all the obvious things, right? Like everybody does all those things, right? The other things that come into play are layers, right? Playlisting is a layer. Official PMVs are layers. Short form content, critically important. Can the artist make interesting, compelling, authentic short form content that somehow or the other is going to connect and want to make people migrate out of one platform and go stream, right? And what I just described is incredibly difficult. It's beyond difficult, right?
Yeah.
Like the whole idea of like, hey, I've gone viral, quote unquote. And just because I've gone viral, that same audience who's like staring at their phone like drug addicts are going to somehow leave that platform to then go and stream, right? 9 times out of 10, they won't, right?
Right.
So here again, can the artist play live? Can they even play a coffee house? Can they put a band together? Can they go from being worth no tickets in whatever town they are to being worth 50 tickets, right? That is long-term artist development, right?
Yeah. Fans need to build a connection with the artist. And we know from being in the music industry, if you're seeing a band for the first time in a small intimate venue, you have a connection. You feel so connected than stumbling across them on TikTok.
Well, I'll say this, and I'll
You
go
know,
back to this Highly Suspect as an example of this, right? So we there was a band called Starset who had a song called My Demons that we wanted to sign. That song ended up being enormous. It's got 1 billion views on YouTube, yada, 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 right? And we decided not to sign them. And 2 weeks later, Peter Burgess signed Highly Suspect, right? They had a song called Lydia. The song was absolutely incredible. The night we signed them in Brooklyn, I think there were literally 10 people at the show.
Wow.
And the band was so unbelievably great that I couldn't understand how they were not signed. It like blew my mind. Like they were literally theater ready in their presentation, right? And they eventually got on their first tour. They were the opening act for Chevelle. They did a US tour. It was one of the only few times they've opened for anybody. And I went to Tulsa to shoot some content because I'd said to our team, you can never get this back. You can never get the infancy of the thing. Like we need to like show them in their like incubation period. So I go there, I go to Tulsa, and I sat down with the singer, Johnny, and I said to him, I have to ask you a question. I'm not being patronizing. How are you guys this good? How do you play this well? And he said to me, he goes, we've played 800 shows. And I go, and I looked at him like he was crazy. He goes, no, up and down the Eastern Seaboard.
That's how you do it. Yep.
We've been playing shows for years.
That is a grind.
And by the time they left the opening slot and went to headline in front of exactly nobody, because nobody knew who the fuck they were incredible. And so every time they left to town, like, and this is what I call the Kiss Army way of marketing shit, because that's how Kiss broke. You know, they were the biggest band in Detroit and worth no tickets anywhere else, right?
Yeah.
But they broke on the road, right? And so Highly Suspect would play these shows. They'd be 25, 50 people. They'd be 100 people next time. They'd be 200. And that's literally how the band developed a fan base on tour while these other things were kind of working in the background. Yeah, radio was helpful. Yeah, we made great fucking video content and whatnot, but they broke on the road.
Yeah, that's, you know, I'm involved in new tech, and I always say same rules, different tools. So you've still got to tour. You've still got to do everything you were doing 20 years ago, but we just have a few different platforms and technology to help spread awareness.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing too, and this is, you know, kind of another obvious thing, you know, for years and years, you know, these platforms made it easy and made people lazy, right? They made lazy in the sense of like, okay, I can get on this playlist, I can get on this, whatever it was, and then my band's just going to break. Like there's going to be some like miracle that happens, right? The problem is that all those things have an expiration date, right?
Right.
So if you get onto one of these magical playlists, it wasn't like back in the day when you guys both know this, MTV could make or break your career. You got on MTV believed in you, MTV got behind you, you could break and become a massive band based on that support. Again, if you have the right song, the right manager, the right label, the right to all those kinds of things mattered hugely, right? But in the you know, I call them like the 2015 through the end of 2020, everybody kind of got drunk on playlisting, right? Playlisting is just that's gonna fix everything, right? And as the volume of consumption started to erode on playlisting, right? And the audience reach of radio was doing the same thing. Pop radio's audience erodes. Active rock's audience has been dead for years, right? All of a sudden, people are like, well, how are we going to develop artists? Because we can't just plug them into these places and pray for rain. You know?
A song is not a career.
We've talked a lot about live venues. We have you for a couple more minutes. Any favorite New York City venues that you've been to, or is it a favorite venue because of a show that you've seen there? So
right. So one of my favorite venues no longer exists, unfortunately, which was CBGB's.
Okay.
Again, because I'm older, CB's had the best PA in New York. And it was such an incredible shithole that there was something just magical and that smelled terrible within the walls of that room. But I saw some incredible shows there when I first moved to New York. I love Irving Plaza, which now is like fresh and new. I love Bowery Ballroom. I still love Mercury Lounge, but not in the summertime, And
we had an interview, and they were talking about Bowery, that's almost a pivotal point in an artist's career to play Bowery, and from then on it could be arena or bigger, bigger venues. But Bowery's a good point in a band's career to be booked at Bowery.
I think Bowery and Irving are great stepping stones that maybe gets you into Hammerstein if that's the right sort of place for you, or into Brooklyn Steel, and now there's, the Paramount in Brooklyn, which is gorgeous, which holds like, I think 4,000 people, and there's also great venues that are, over bridge and tunnels. There's the Paramount in Long Island, which is a beautiful venue. There's the Capitol Theater right near me in Westchester that I love. It's kind of like a mini beacon. There's a lot of places to play. The frustrating thing about the New York area for me as a rock fan, there's no rock scene in New York. Like that's went away years and years ago.
Right.
Because rock radio left New York years and years ago.
Yeah.
There's no one really kind of propping it up, There's a bunch of this kind of underground stuff, right? And there's national acts that come through all the places I just mentioned, but there's no real scene. Probably the last quote unquote scene was probably the era of the Strokes and yeahs and all that kind of stuff. And that was a magical time for all that. But that was a very long time ago.
Yeah. Is there an artist that you would travel out of country to see?
100%. I've traveled out to see Springsteen out of the country.
Canada doesn't count.
Okay, I would.
No, I'm joking.
I would go see. I actually would much rather see the Oasis reunion in the UK than I would at Giant Stadium, just because it was way more kind of event driven.
Yeah.
I have stumbled. Here's the great thing, right? Traveling to shows as a destination is a wonderful thing, and depending on the type of artist, the audiences in places like Spain, Italy, Sweden are incredible, and it's a completely different level of fandom than they have in the US. The crowds are way louder, they're way more appreciative, and they're loyal forever in a way that American audiences may not necessarily be. American audiences are fickle. Right?
Yeah.
You could be a band that had success in America playing 5,000 seaters, and when you don't have a hit, you're playing in front of 300 people.
Mm-hmm.
If you're amazing, if you're an amazing live band, you can have careers outside of the US for years on end. The one label that did this really, really well, was Roadrunner, where all these American bands, Machine Head and Slipknot and Killswitch and Hatebreed and whatever, they over toured Europe. They went to Europe 3 times a year. So even in like the downturn years of each one of these bands in America, where they had fallen out of favor, Machine Head could draw 10,000 people in the UK.
Yeah.
They were playing Irving in front of 400 people in the US. And I think those things are great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we know you have a hard out. We've had a great time talking. We could probably extend this for at least another hour.
Yeah.
But we'll do that over a beer.
Yeah.
Really great to catch up.
Or we'll have you come back and do a part 2.
There you go.
That. Yeah, it was great to see you both. And Perry, what a pleasure, man. It's been a long time.
It has been a long time. And thank you so much for making the time to speak with us. We really, really appreciate it. And we're just having a great time doing this podcast because we get to reconnect with people that we really liked working with in the business. So thank you.
Thanks again for having me. And this was super fun. So happy to do a part 2. If you want to do a Kiss roundtable, I can pull some people together for the roundtable.
We were just talking about doing something similar to that. So maybe.
Yeah, I'm all yours.
All right.
Very cool. All right, John, enjoy the day.
All right,
Thank you, John.
Too.
We appreciate it.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for joining us today in the Music Lounge.
And tune in next week to hear more stories about your favorite era of MTV.